The next class of submarines started by the Japanese was the 8 boats of the 1,785 surfaced and 2,440 submerged ton I-68 class, also known as the Kaidai 6 type, sometimes known as the I-68 and I-74 classes, also known as the Kaidai 6A and 6B types. This was because the last two were built to a slightly modified design that made them slightly longer and heavier, being 1,810 surfaced and 2,465 submerged ton. It also meant their cruising speed was faster on the surface at the cost of losing range. Deck gun armament also varied. The first three carried over the 100mm caliber gun from the previous class, but from I-71 onward, they switched to a 120mm gun. The lack of dual purposeness in the lighter gun being acknowledged. These guys were fast. They could get up to 23 knots on the surface. But of course, fuel consumption meant they couldn't do it very long. It has to be remembered, fuel consumption versus speed does not increase linearly, but rather parabolically. Just like with your car, there is an optimal cruising speed for every ship or sub based on many factors. As I've already covered, the Japanese, like most countries, mostly placed an emphasis on surface speed and range over submerged performance. More on that later. This was because, unlike modern submarines, boats of this era spent most of their time on the surface. So that made sense. Overall, these were pretty good boats. Yes, they suffered from Japan's industrial and technological trailing the West, but given that limitation, they were pretty good. They weren't gimmicky, just straightforward doing what submarines do, and they achieved some notable events, both good and bad. For example, I-168 finished off Yorktown, while I-70 was the first major unit sunk. Huh? I-168? I-70? Yup, like many other I-boats, in May 1942, the survivors were renumbered into the 100 series. So I-168 was the former I-68. Got it? Good. They did, however, pay dearly. Of the 8, not a single one survived the war. In fact, all were sunk by May 1944. Again, this was a combination of growing American material and technical superiority and their own vulnerability to detection, especially by radar and sonar. Japanese submarines paid for their range by being large, which made them easy to detect by radar, track on sonar, hard to maneuver, slow to dive, and thus easy to kill. I'm not saying they were made of glass, but the loss rate speaks for itself. I-68 was started June 18, 1931, and was completed July 31, 1934. I-69 was started December 22, 1931, and was completed September 28, 1935. I-71 was started January 25, 1933, and was completed November 9, 1935. I-71 was started February 15, 1933, and was completed December 24, 1935. I-72 was started December 16, 1933, and completed January 7, 1937. I-73 was started April 5, 1934, and completed January 7, 1937. I-74 was started October 16, 1934, and was completed August 15, 1938. I-75 was started November 1, 1934, and was completed December 18, 1938. Main armament was 4 bow and 2 stern 533mm tubes for 14 torpedoes. A single open 100mm deck gun was mounted forward of the sail on I-68 through 70. On I-71 through 75, this was replaced by a 120mm gun. Propulsion on the surface was provided by two diesel engines which produced 9,000 horsepower that ran the two propellers and recharged the batteries for a surface speed of 23 knots. While submerged, they used their batteries to power two motors which produced 1,800 horsepower for a top speed of 8 knots. Range on the surface was 14,000 nautical miles at 10 knots on the first 6 and 10,000 nautical miles at 16 knots on the last 2. Submerged, they could do 65 nautical miles at 3 knots. Test diving depth was 75 meters. In August 1939, I-70 was fitted with Type 93 sonar and a basic angle-solving computer. I-68 started the Pacific War patrolling off Pearl Harbor, hoping to catch any ship trying to escape the harbor during or after the attack. She was also trying to recover any midget sub that might have escaped, but none did, or pick up any pilots that were shot down. In the middle of the month, she was spotted and heavily depth-charged, damaging her batteries and flooding her aft torpedo room, causing her to eventually return to Japan for repairs, where she arrived in early January 1942. With repairs completed in late May, now I-168 set off to patrol around Midway ahead of the invasion. On the morning of June 4th, her crew got to watch the dawn air raid through the periscope. In the pre-dawn hours of June 5th, she shelled the island, but the Marines there shot back, so she ducked out. The next morning, June 6th, in the pre-dawn hours, she found the damaged Yorktown, and after working through the screen, fired 4 torpedoes. One hit the destroyer Hammond, immediately breaking her in half and sinking her. 2 more hit the already crippled Yorktown, mortally wounding her. In return, she was mercilessly depth-charged and only escaped with heavy damage that sent her back to Japan for repairs, arriving late in the month. With repairs completed at the end of August, she headed to the Solomons and began a series of supply runs to Starvation Island, until late November, when she returned to Japan for an overhaul. With that completed in mid-December, she headed back to the Solomons and made another supply run to Guadalcanal that lasted until mid-January 1943, when she again returned to Japan, the idea of holding the island being abandoned. From early March through early May, she made several supply runs to the Aleutians garrison and then returned to Japan, those outposts also being given up on. With her refit completed in mid-July, she left Japan and headed south to patrol the northern Solomons. On the evening of July 27, 1943, in the Stephen Strait, she spotted the USS Scamp and fired a torpedo at her, but missed. Scamp fired 4 torpedoes back and sunk her. I-69 started the Pacific War patrolling off Pearl Harbor, hoping to catch any ship trying to escape the harbor during or after the attack. She was also trying to recover any midget sub that might have escaped. None did, or pick up any pilots that were shot down. On the 9th, she briefly got stuck in an anti-submarine net but managed to work herself loose and headed to Kwajalein, arriving at the end of the month. In mid-January 1942, she set out to patrol around Midway and even tried to shell the island on February 8th, but the Marines there shot back, so she had to dive to escape after only a few rounds. 2 days later, on the 10th, she tried again, but was spotted by 2 Wildcats and was near missed with 2 bombs along with being strafed, again sending her back to Kwajalein, where she arrived in mid-February. In the later half of February, she patrolled around Wake in case the U.S. tried to liberate the island, but when that didn't happen, she returned to Japan, arriving in early March. With the refit completed in mid-April, she left Japan for Kwajalein, where she arrived in early May, with a patrol around Wake along the way. For most of June, the now I-169 patrolled around Midway in support of the battle, but afterwards returned to Kwajalein. From there, she spent most of July and the first half of August patrolling the New Hebrides, and then returned to Japan for an overhaul. With that completed, in early September, she again sailed to the Solomons and helped in the effort to run supplies to Guadalcanal until late December, when she returned to Japan for an overhaul. Again ready, in mid-January 1943, she headed north and made a series of supply runs from Paramushiro to the Aleutians garrisons until early August, with a couple of refits in Japan mixed in there and capping it off. In late September, she left Japan and moved to Truk, from where she patrolled around the Gilberts until mid-December, when she returned to Truk. In late January 1944, she left Truk for Rabaul, and from there made a supply run to New Guinea, and then returned to Truk in mid-March. On April 4, 1944, a bomber raid hit Truk while she was in port. Attempting a crash dive to escape the raid, she submerged before all of the hatches could be closed. I-70 was patrolling off Pearl Harbor at the start of the Pacific War, trying to catch any ship that was attempting to escape the harbor during or after the attack and recover any midget subs or pilots. On the morning of December 10th, I-70 was bombed by an aircraft from Enterprise and damaged. Later that day, another plane from Enterprise finished her off. I-71 started the Pacific War patrolling off Oahu, hoping to catch any ship trying to escape Pearl during or after the raid and retrieve any midget subs or any downed pilots. On the evening of December 21st, she tried to shell Johnston Island, but they fired back, so she noped out of there and eventually returned to Japan in early March. With her refit completed in mid-April, she left Japan and sailed for Kwajalein. From there, in late May, now I-171 left Kwajalein to act as a navigation beacon near French frigate shoals for the planes that were to overfly Pearl before the Battle of Midway, and patrolled between Hawaii and Midway until late June, when she returned to Kwajalein. In early July, she left Kwajalein and reconnoitered the Samoa-Fiji area until mid-August, when she returned to Japan for an overhaul. With her overhaul finally completed in mid-February 1943, she sailed north and did a series of patrols in the Aleutians until early August, when she returned to Japan for a refit. Again ready, in mid-September, she headed south and patrolled the New Hebrides until mid-November, when she arrived at Truk. In early January 1944, she left Truk for Rabaul, from where she headed out to make a supply run to New Guinea. West of Buka on February 1, 1944, she was detected by the destroyers Guest and Hudson and sunk. I-72 started the Pacific War patrolling off Oahu, hoping to catch any ship trying to escape Pearl during or after the raid and retrieve any midget subs or downed pilots. On the evening of December 16th, she shelled Hilo Bay on Hawaii. In the pre-dawn hours of January 23, 1942, west of Hawaii, she sunk the fleet oiler Neches. That one really hurt. In early March, she returned to Japan for a refit. With training and overhaul completed in late August, now I-172 left Japan and headed south. From Truk, she made a series of patrols around Guadalcanal. On November 3, 1942, she was sunk southwest of San Cristobal by the destroyer McCulloch. I-73 started the Pacific War patrolling off Oahu, hoping to catch any ship trying to escape Pearl during or after the raid and retrieve any midget subs or downed pilots. On the evening of December 23rd, she shelled Johnston Island, doing minor damage. West of Midway, on the morning of January 27, 1942, she was spotted and sunk by the submarine Gudgeon. I-74 started the Pacific War patrolling off Oahu, hoping to catch any ship trying to escape Pearl during or after the raid and retrieve any midget sub or downed pilots. In February 1942, she returned to Japan for a refit. In mid-May, she sailed to Kwajalein, and from there, the now I-174 sailed in late May to act as lifeguard for the later aborted Pearl Harbor overflight ahead of the Battle of Midway, then switched to patrolling the area. In late June, she returned to Kwajalein for resupply. In early July, she left Kwajalein to patrol off Australia's east coast, but sprang a fuel leak, so put into Rabaul for repairs. In late August, with Guadalcanal Now the tip of the spear, she left Rabaul to patrol around the island until early November, when she returned to Japan for an overhaul. With overhaul and training completed in early May 1943, she headed south and patrolled off Australia's east coast until the end of June, when she put into Truk. After resupply at Truk, she headed to Rabaul and began a series of supply runs to New Guinea that lasted until mid-October. In late November, she was sent to patrol the Gilberts in an attempt to stem the American landing there, but for her effort was heavily depth-charged and had to return to Japan for repairs, arriving in late December. With repairs completed, in early April, she left Japan and headed to patrol the Marshalls to attack the U.S. invasion force. East of Truk, on the morning of April 12, 1944, she was spotted by a patrol plane and sunk. I-75 started the Pacific War patrolling off Pearl Harbor, hoping to catch any ship trying to escape the harbor during or after the attack. She was also trying to recover any midget subs that might have escaped, but none did, or pick up any pilots that were shot down. On the evening of December 15th, she shelled Maui. On the afternoon of December 24th, she shelled Palmyra and then returned to Kwajalein. In mid-January 1942, she left Kwajalein to reconnoiter the Aleutians and then returned to Japan, arriving in mid-February. With her refit completed in mid-April, she sailed to Kwajalein. Then, in late May, the now I-175 sailed to patrol around Oahu ahead of the Battle of Midway. We all know how that went, so in late June, she returned to Kwajalein. In early July, with the focus moved back to the south, she sailed to patrol off Australia's east coast until early August, when she was redirected to patrol the Guadalcanal area. Southwest of Espiritu Santo, on the morning of August 12th, she was bombed and damaged by a Dauntless from Saratoga, then stalked by the destroyers Sturt and Grayson, but managed to make her way back to Rabaul for repairs in mid-August. Patched up, she made a couple more patrols around Guadalcanal until mid-November, when she put into Truk. While there, she collided with an oiler and had to return to Japan for repairs, arriving in late November. With repairs completed in mid-May 1943, she headed north and made several patrols and supply runs in the Aleutians until mid-August, when she again returned to Japan. With her overhaul completed in mid-September, she left Japan and sailed south for Truk, from where in mid-October she sailed to patrol around Wake, but was diverted in November to try to break up the American invasion of the Gilberts. On the morning of November 23rd, she managed to sink the escort carrier Liscum Bay, and later in the month arrived at Kwajalein for refueling and resupply, and then headed for Truk, arriving in early December. With the Marshalls being the next obvious target, in late January 1944, she left Truk to patrol around Wochi. East of Wochi, in the pre-dawn hours of February 4th, she was detected by the destroyer Charette and the destroyer escort Fair. After a short hunt, Fair sunk her with Hedgehog.